It's a real honor for me to be here with you to help celebrate your 25th anniversary. There's some faces that I recognize from long, long ago, and it's really great. My wife and I believe in anniversaries. Cindy, would you raise your hand? This is my wife, Cindy. We're celebrating our next month. Well, yeah, it's just about a month from today. Celebrating our 47th wedding anniversary. Obviously married her when she was like 6. But so we believe in, and I believe in looking back. I'm really glad to be here, especially on this day, because I know the theme of your anniversary celebration is looking back gratefully and looking forward expectantly. And I have a lot to look back on when it concerns the Church of the Messiah, for which I'm extremely grateful. Let me just start off by saying that literally, if it had not been for this church, I would not be where I am in my life and in my ministry. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. Genesis chapter 28. Jacob has had a rough time. And he has cheated his brother. And he, in essence, has lost everything except the blessing that he somehow swindled out of his brother. And you know the story about he's in the wilderness, and he's a dream. There's the Jacob's ladder dream that we sing about sometimes in Sunday school. But here's the end of that passage, and God speaks to him. And he says, behold, in verse 15 of Genesis 28, and behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his bed and set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on its top. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which means the house of God. So establishing monuments, looking back, is a good thing, especially when we want to think about what God has done. Let me tell you, I noticed you didn't have a clock. Oh, it's okay. I can see it. I put my glasses on, I can read it. You know, a minister took his watch off one day in church, and the little boy said, Daddy, what does it mean when the minister takes his watch off? His dad said, it doesn't mean a thing, son. I want to tell you some of my story as I look back gratefully, if that's all right. I grew up non-churched. My mother read to me Bible stories from the earliest days, and so there was never a day in my life that I could recall where I did not believe in God. So for that, I'm grateful. I started going to church when 2 girls and a new pastor in the Methodist church got lost looking for someone and drove by my house. And I was on the front porch playing the guitar, and one of the girls said, well, let's see if he wants to go to youth group. So they stopped, came over to see me and introduced themselves, and wanted to know if I wanted to go to the Methodist Youth Fellowship, which I knew nothing about. And I said, what are you going to do? It was at the start of summer, school's out, and I'm looking ahead to a great boring summer. And my mom said it was okay. My dad was going somewhere, so she said, sure, you can go. So I went. And they had told me all these great things they were going to do during the summer. And the girls were really pretty. And so I got in the car, and I said, how many kids are in this group? And one of them leaned over and smiled sweetly and said, now there are 3. So that began my church journey. Over the years, I was a part of the youth group. I was the president of the youth group. I went to the military after high school, came back, went to college, became a youth pastor and a minister of youth in the Methodist church, and I served as a pastor for a few years in the Methodist church. And then I became involved in another denomination, the largest Pentecostal denomination in the world, And all of that was good. I spent 19 years there. But one day, somebody gave me a book to read. And I was in my 40s, I suppose, by now. And the book that they gave me was called Evangelicals on the Canterbury Trail. And it talked about how people were coming from the evangelical world back to a sacramental church school. A church, well, I couldn't figure out why they would do that, because I had been in one of those. And I didn't want to go back there. But I thought the book was fascinating. That probably was the first step on the journey for me. There were a lot of other steps, but there's two others that come to mind. One is I'm in my church. We had a great church. I had a good career in the denomination where I was. And one day I am on the platform during praise and worship. It's a great service. And the thought runs through my mind that if the Holy Spirit didn't exist, we would never know it, because we still had a great time in church. And that bothered me. At first I attributed that thought to the enemy, but it stayed with me. Sometime later, I had another thought ran through my mind, some months later, that if a couple of the apostles ever came to our church, would they recognize it as church for them? And that bothered me too. So I did a study in the New Testament looking for the church. But the problem with that is that every Christian organization believes they're a New Testament church, every single one. And I was talking to a friend who's a Lutheran, and I was talking to him about my dilemma. And he said, if you want to find the church, you need to go to the early church fathers. And I confessed my ignorance, and I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that began a more intense journey. I began to read, I began to look at things a little differently. I began to wonder if it was possible. And I did a pretty thorough study, and I came to 3 conclusions. 2 of them I was happy with, 1 of them troubled me. And after looking through the scriptures, through the entire New Testament again, and reading the early church fathers, I came to the conclusion that the early church was evangelical. You can't not read that and come away with anything different. I also, to my great satisfaction, found out that the early church believed in the empowering presence and gifts and fruit of the Holy Spirit. That the early church was charismatic. This is cool. And then I found out it was liturgical and sacramental, and that was not cool. And so I continued to read and continued to study. And it challenged some of my theological assumptions. One day I read an article in a magazine that talked about the charismatic Episcopal Church. And I found it interesting, but I didn't trust that particular magazine for various reasons. Then later, months later, I'm reading Christianity Today, which is by no means a charismatic magazine. And it's a similar article. And it talks about the charismatic Episcopal Church. And it talks about these 3 streams. I went, now that's interesting. So I'm thinking, well, I wonder if they even had a telephone. Or is it some guy operating out of his mother's basement? And so I called information, and there was a charismatic Episcopal Church, and I called the number, and I got a secretary, not the guy's mom, in a basement. And so I told him I would like information. They said, well, send you some information, ask for all my details. A couple of days later, I received a phone call from a man who had the title of canon missioner, and that man's name was John Holloway. And so I met with him. John had also been a Methodist minister in his earlier days. And I met him for lunch. We had about a 2 or 3 hour lunch. And during that lunch, he said, you should go to one of our churches and see what it's like. Now, I have to back up just a little bit and tell you that the church that I served at the time, my family and I had gone to that church when it was 4.5 years old. It had 75 people in attendance. And by the time I was speaking with John Holloway, we averaged somewhere a little under 400. And it was the 7th largest church out of 214 in the state. And so it wasn't like I needed to go anywhere. And in fact, we had finally got to the place where it was like, okay, we can stop struggling now. And life is good. And yet these things that flitted across my mind were still there. And I'm wondering, well, surely God, either this is a distraction of the enemy or this might be God. And I kind of hope it's a distraction of the enemy because I'm pretty satisfied where I am. So anyway, so he said I should check out a church. So I did. I checked on the charismatic Episcopal churches in our state, and took Sunday off and went to visit one. When I came back, my wife asked me, she took the day, I didn't want her to go, I wanted just to go and sit and talk with people. And so left her at home. So I came back, she said, so what'd you think? I said, well, if that's the CEC, then I'm going to stay where I am. It was not impressive. It didn't move me. It was just, it was everything that I thought about a sacramental church being. Now that was unfair of me, and I was judging it, and I know that's all wrong. And when John Holloway, later to be Bishop Holloway, called me a couple of days later, he said, what did you think? I said, I told him the same thing. He said, well, and then he explained where the people were coming from in that church. And he said, look, if you really want to see a church in operation where the three strings are evident every Sunday, you need to go to Church of the Messiah in Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm thinking, that's a long way away from where I live. So I said, okay. So I put that on the back shelf. A couple of months later, on December 30th, 1994, there was a funeral in Albany, Georgia. And I had taken that Sunday off. So I went to the funeral in Albany, Georgia, and I was going to come home the next day. And I got a map out, and I looked at it to see if there was a better route back home. And in one of those mysterious ways, you know the Jedi mind trick? This is not your droid. This is not the droid you're looking for. I looked at the map, and as I looked at the map, I'm in Albany, Georgia, and over here's Jacksonville, Florida. And God pulled the Jedi mind trick and said, it's very close. It's not far away. So I called my wife, not realizing that it was actually 210 miles away. So I called my wife and I said, you know what? I said, they have a service over there on a Saturday night. So I'm going to go to Jacksonville. I'm going to chill on Saturday, and I'm going to go to this service, and then I'll be done with it. And I'll come back and I'll settle in, and we'll go from there. So that's what happened. The next day, Friday. Actually, Friday was the 30th. Excuse me. Yeah, Friday was the 30th. Saturday was the 31st. January the 1st was Sunday. Okay, that's important. Because on Friday, under the influence of the Jedi mind trick, I drove for what seemed to be a long time for such a short distance. And I got a room at the Ramada Inn, Expressway. And so here was my plan. My plan is to, have dinner, and just chill out, and then the next day, it's Saturday, I know it's cold in December, I'm gonna go to the beach because I love the beach. A bad day at the beach is better than a good day about anywhere else. I'm gonna go to the beach, and then on Saturday, I'll go to the service, and then I'll get up Sunday morning and come home, and that's what we'll do. So, there's a McDonald's, or at least there was, not far from Ramada. So late at night, I went to McDonald's and I got a Big Mac and fries and something, probably a Diet Coke, and I came back, and at 11:45 p.m., I'm watching television, and I'm eating this Big Mac, and I'm halfway through, and I'm on a ground floor on the back side of the Ramada, and it's dark out there, and it doesn't feel safe back there, really. And I noticed that when I came back from McDonald's. I thought, wow, if I were going to get mud, this would be a great place to get mud. And so I'm out there in the room, and I jumped up because I thought somebody has walked in on me because I heard them say, this is a big deal. And I jumped up, ready to go to war, and there's nobody there. And I opened the door and I looked out, there's nobody there. I did a little walk up and down, nobody's there. So I went back in, I thought, well, how strange is that? And I sat down, I took another bite of the Big Mac, and the same thing happened. Now when I say I heard a voice, I don't mean I heard a voice on the inside. One time in my life that I heard a voice with my ears was on January 30th, just before midnight, 1994. And at this point in time, I realized that this is something different. I mean, the Lord didn't say, "Wow, David, this is the biggest deal." I would have known that was God. But I did the same thing. I went, I looked out, and I came back in, and I thought, and I was tingly all over because I thought, this doesn't happen to me, not like that. And so that day I didn't go to the beach. I decided if this is a big deal, I need to fast and I need to pray. So I spent all day long in my room fasting and praying, reading the Word, and walking on the campus a little bit of the Ramada. And then I went to the service. Except it wasn't a service. There was a litany of laughter. It was a Christian comedian. And that was okay. You know. And it was funny. But I knew that wasn't why I was there. This is a big deal. This is and there was a dinner afterwards. Well, I couldn't stay for the dinner because I'm fasting, right? Obviously, I don't do that a lot. And I was doing it that day. And so I came back to the room, and I called my wife. I said, I'm going to stay over for the service. So I did. I came back, and I stayed over for the service. And I'm sitting, I don't know, maybe third row from the front. And I had no idea what to expect. I mean, I've been in charismatic churches, I've been in evangelical churches, I've been in Episcopal churches. But if this is a big deal, then it must be something different and unique that I've never seen before or experienced before. And so I need to know what this is about. And from the moment that the worship team began to sing like they did today before the service, from the moment that happened, my eyes filled with tears. And I knew that whatever was about to happen, God was in the place. And then all the stuff that's normal to me now began to happen. There's the incense, there's the procession, there's this, there's that. And I sat there and there were two things that went through my mind that entire time. One is I never believed that this could be a possibility in any church. And number two was grief, because I thought my ministry is over. I cannot go back. So I came back. Actually, I went to lunch with Bishop Howard and Bishop, I'm not sure if he's a bishop then, but Bishop Woodall. He might have been the dean then. Anyway, Doug Woodall. And went to lunch with him, but I didn't eat because I'm still in this searching phase, and asked him a lot of questions, and we were probably at lunch till 2 o'clock, and I left and drove home. Just full of questions, but something has happened in me that I knew could not be easily undone. And so I went back thinking that this is, what am I going to do here? I mean, I'm in this great church. but I felt like my time was coming to an end. And so I preached for 6 weeks like it was my last sermon. And even my board noticed it. And so I told them what had happened to me in Jacksonville. And so they all wanted to come to a service. So we did the same thing. We loaded everybody up. We came down to Jacksonville. They came to a service. And they were all blown away. And we went back with the idea that we're going to transform this church into one like that. And I thought, this is good, because I can have my cake and eat it too. Because, well, obviously it didn't happen that way. That was in either February or March. And then in the late summer, Archbishop Adler came to do a Signs and Symbols conference at our church and threw hand grenades everywhere. By the time Christmas had come, we had lost between a fourth and a third of our congregation. But as long as our board was in unity, then I felt like we were on solid ground, because we knew that this was the leadership. And they were perfectly willing to handle the losses and continue on with what God was leading us to do. Until February of '95, when there were elections for the board. And some of those guys were term limited and rotated off, and some new folks came on. And it didn't take very long before I knew that this is not going to work. And so I had stayed in contact with John Holloway and Doug Woodall, you know, and kept them apprised of where we were. I went to a Lenten retreat with the clergy of what was then the Southeast Diocese at the Monastery of the Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia. So I was getting to know people and to understand people's hearts. And I realized that a whole lot of people had come from a whole lot of places, called out from where they were, not because other places were bad, but because where God was calling them to something good and something unique. And so once again, my wife and I came to Jacksonville. This time went to the Holiday Inn Resort out on the beach in June of 1995. No, 1996. Because 1995 was that year of upheaval. And then 1995, the board changed. People were great people, but it was no longer in complete unity. And then we came in June. And I called someone from here and I said, look, we're in town. I just want to let you know that. And I'm here because I really need to hear from God about this thing, about what God's leading us to do. And so he said, well, let's get together. I said, no, I don't want to get together. Not this time. I just want to let you know I'm in town. So I'm praying and seeking God out there. And I remember sitting out on the balcony, I guess, looking over the ocean. And I had this vision. It was a strange, odd little vision. It didn't last very long. What I saw was sand, which, you know, you'd think, well, of course you're at the beach, you're sand. But then there was this line drawn in the sand. And my spirit, I heard the Lord say, it's time to choose. You can stay on this side of the line. You can stay where you are now. And you will be a good pastor in a good church of this denomination. And I will bless you. But you have to lay all this other stuff down. You have to lay it aside. Or you can step across the line, taking nothing with you, and I will bless you. And my response to God was, what the heck is that about? I mean, blessed if you do, blessed if you don't. It's kind of the opposite. I'm used to it in my life. And, but I thought, well, what does that even mean? Well, I think it means exactly what it said. I had a choice. The choice I made was important, but I could do it without fear. And so now it becomes, what do we do? So nothing happened for 2 more months until I went to the monastery to pray. And I said, I'm going to get an answer one way or the other. I'm either going to stay on this side of the line or we're going to cross over. And Cindy was behind me. Cindy thought we should cross the line long before I came to that conclusion. went to the monastery, and it didn't take very long. And I knew that our time there was up. I came back and announced my resignation to the board, and I had 2 more Sundays. I was going to give them 4, but they wanted me to do 2 because they wanted to, if I was going to move on, they wanted to move on. And so, Mark Johnson, who was with me at the church, decided, and I decided I'm not going to ask anybody to come with me. I'm not going to ask anybody to come with me. Well, for one thing, I didn't know that we were going to stay where we were, because my training said that if you leave the church, you get out of town, you stay far away. And so I had one family, and then another family who heard we were leaving, who came and said separately, and they didn't know that the one had done the other, came and said, let us know where you wind up. Because I was doing the normal pastor search thing. You know, I was talking to the bishops about if this church is open, that, you know, where we can go, because that was what I was used to. And I said, well, we'll stay in touch. I'll let you know where we wind up. You know, and we'll keep in touch. And both of them said, no, that's not what we mean. We want to, wherever you go, we're going. Lord, it's spoke to our hearts, we're going to go where you go. Well, I didn't know what that meant. You know, I've never had that before. I mean, I didn't. When are you going to go where I go? What if we would go to Alaska? Yeah, we were. And so I contacted back down here again, and I said, and so I was asking questions, and I came to the conclusion that if done right, maybe we could stay in the area. And so I didn't ask anybody to go with us. I had people say, look, if you want me to go, I'll go with you. And my response was, I can't tell you what to do, I'm not God. And so I knew that we wouldn't have very many. I did have one of our men, who's now a priest, who at that time was on that board, and who had gone with us to Jacksonville. And he said, how many do you think will go with you? I said, Tony, I'm not asking anybody to go. He said, well, how many do you think will go? I said, out of 400, maybe 20. He said, you gotta be kidding. I said, no. And he said, well, are you gonna be okay with that? Because that's not very many people. And Tony was in the Navy, didn't Vietnam War. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Let's say you're on board a ship and your commander, Tony, says, I want you to hit the beach, take that tree line, and you can have 200 National Guardsmen or 20 Navy SEALs. Which one are you going to take? Now you have to understand that back in those days, National Guardsmen, that's how you beat the draft. I was actually in the National Guard after I got out of the Marine Corps for a year, and it was like everybody was Hawkeye Pierce and Trapper John. So it was fun, but it wasn't very military. And if that offends you, I'm sorry. I speak from experience. In fact, the second drill I was there, they made me the non-commissioned officer in charge of training. Who does that? Henry Blake does that. That's who did that. Anyway, and that's what we started with, basically. I resigned. We had a prayer meeting in our home. There were 19 people there. My family, who at the time consisted of 8, and 11 more people. And that's how we started. And we did a lot of things wrong because we were figuring out how to do this. We met in a funeral home for 6 years. There's a lot of jokes that came out of that. You understand that if the Lord comes, you guys go first because the dead in Christ will rise first. In fact, we had four weddings there. One guy came in, which room's your broom laid out in? In the funeral home, there was this elevator, and the elevator was right outside the chapel, and when they used it, it would ding. Our offices were upstairs, it would ding. And there was a crematorium in there, too. Anyway, one day, somebody kept going up and down the elevator, and during the summer, it was ding, ding, and people would look over, ding. I said, look, that's a crematory. The guy's done, all right? But here's what we discovered, man. If somebody visited us, that was a serious prospect. You just don't come to a funeral. I remember one day, though, there was this family that came to visit. And they came to visit because one of our families asked them to come. And they did the same thing everybody else did. You gotta be kidding me. Now, when I advertised it as the new beautiful brick building at such and such old Fayetteville Road, the Carmichael building. That's how I advertised it. People would call me, is that the funeral home? So after a while, we just quit hiding, it kind of came out. That's when we went to funeral home. And those folks would not charge us rent for 6 years. Because they said, whatever you were going to pay some rent, put it aside for land in the building. And we asked if we could be there 6 months to a year, thinking that would get us going. And they kept saying, you're welcome to stay as long as you want. And so we did. We stayed until we built our first building. But I remember this one day when a visitor came, and I'm shaking hands at the door, and he walked out. And he was an executive type. I mean, he was a big-time executive. He had these tears in his eyes. And he said, I wasn't expecting this. God is in this place. And it brought me back to Messiah. Because that's what I felt on that day, on January 1st, 1995. That's what I thought too. So I knew that we were probably on the right track. I came down for the convocation before I came into the CEC, the international convocation in Jacksonville. Came down for that. I do want to go back and say, I said we lost about a quarter to a third of our folks in 1995, again 1995, and that's true. I wished if they were going to leave that all at the one time, because I think it would have been kinder for everyone to have left instead of dribbling out piecemeal over about 3 months. But finally that ended, and then we began to grow again after the first year. And I knew that we were done there, really and truly. When one of the board members who had been with me in our trip to Jacksonville, when I said to him privately one day, I said, James, I think we're stable. Now we can continue moving on. He threw his hands up and he says, my God, David, how many more people do you want to lose? He said, we don't need to add anything new. We need to stay where we are. And that's when I knew that something was done. Something was over. Either our little experiment in the 3 streams was over, or I was over. Something was done, though. And then all that other stuff happened. We began the prayer meeting, like I said, with 11 people, in addition to my family. I didn't ask anybody to come with us because I didn't want to be known as a church split. We continued to pray for that church for 18 months every day, that it would succeed, that it would grow, and it did. And if we had somebody who got married and they invited us to come back for the wedding, or somebody in that church died and I wanted to go to the funeral, I called the new pastor and asked permission to come. He was always very gracious. But in the years to come, I would come to Messiah a number of times. I would come to be refreshed, to be recharged, to be renewed. And I know that there have been struggles. There have been struggles with my congregation as well. And yet the key has always been, but it's God here. God is here, in spite of what I feel in the flesh, then that it's okay. He's in charge. I had a pastor friend one time who was in Africa. And this was before the days of cell phone. He was out in the bush. Someone came to him and there was an emergency at home. And he came back in from the bush to the city and tried to get a flight, and he couldn't get a flight out for 5 days. And he decided that, you know what, God knew he was in Africa. God was in Africa, God was in the United States. And he decided that since he couldn't do anything about it, that he would just go back into the bush. And as he put it, because this thing didn't catch God off guard. I've never forgotten that. It's always been something since, that's been 40 years ago. This didn't catch God off guard. Whatever it is, whether it's good, whether we deem it to be bad, this didn't catch God off guard. Now, let me tell you about a man. I'm just going to tell you. Does anybody know the name Mordecai Ham? Mordecai Ham. Okay. If you don't recognize that name, I'll tell you what he's famous for. He was a revivalist, and he had a revival in North Carolina. And one of the people that came down the aisle after Mordecai preached one day was a 17-year-old teenager named Billy Graham. Everything that Billy Graham accomplished in his life, Mordecai had a part in. Every soul that came to Christ, every person that was helped, everyone who received counseling, anyone who ever heard the gospel around the world, whatever the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and whatever the Franklin Graham Ministry has done that's good and wholesome and healthy, Mordecai Ham will have his place in the history of Billy Graham. You never know who's going to come through your doors. You just never know. Years ago, when I was in Colorado, I was a minister of outreach for this church for about 1,000, and I was given several ministries, but one of them was a college and career. They had tried to get that ministry started for a long time. They had 12 people, and when they weren't all college students, some of them were in their 20s and 30s. They were all single, and so I worked for a year really hard to get that group grown. And at the end of the year, I'd grown the group from 12 to 12. Then I went on vacation for 2 weeks, and I came back and they had 14. Which led one of the guys to say, "You should go on vacation again." There was a young man who came. He was one of those who came after I came back from vacation. His name was John Capetto. John Capetto was a young man in his early 20s, granny glasses, long, kinky, blonde hair. You know, he came out of the drug, sex, and rock and roll culture. And somebody had won him to Christ. He'd given his life to Christ, and somebody said, "You should go to church." And he said, "I don't know where to go to church." And they said, "Well, there's this church downtown, and they got a group for somebody your age. You should go check it out." And he did. And John came several weeks, and I asked him if he would play the guitar and help us lead worship. He said no, he wouldn't, because he had made the guitar his God. He told the Lord he had never let his guitar become a God again. So I let it go for about a month and went back and said, "Would you pray about whether or not you can use the guitar for God's glory?" He said, "I'll do that." So short story is that he began to lead our worship. He began to reach out to other people in the same culture he came out of. They started coming to a group we call it Chi Alpha. They came to the group. 2 years later, that group averaged 174 kids. It was a God moment in my life. I watched it happen. John put together a band called Hundredfold. They put out a record. And we left there after, well, in June of 1993 to come to Georgia, 1983 to come to Georgia. And years passed, and I didn't really stay in touch because I was busy, they were busy. And I was talking with somebody out there, and I asked him, I said, "Whatever became of John Capetto?" And he said, "Let me give you this website and look it up." So he did. I looked it up. This was only about 5 years ago. And John Capetto now is the pastor of the largest church in western Colorado. He still plays the guitar on Sunday morning. And I gotta tell you, I have a part in that.
Amen.
You know, I say that lightly. But had he not come to that group, and had he not become involved, I didn't see that. That's what happened when I came here. When I came here, things changed in some significant ways. Let me tell you what's happened since I first came. On that December 1st, January 1st, 1995. Christ the King Church exists in our community. It wouldn't have been there. There were 2 other churches that had been planted by people, 3 other churches that had been planted by people affiliated with Christ the King. I want to read you some names. Father Mark Johnson, Canon Wayman Ahart, Canon Paul Massey, Father David Jones, Father Jeremy DeLeo, Father Michael St. Clair, Deacon David Neese, Deacon Dan Ahart, Archdeacon Dan Hale, Father Tony McGee, Father Jim Gardner, Canon Jim Taylor, Father Andy Ellis, Father Paul Dickinson, Dean Jason Epps, Canon Charles Jones, Archdeacon Bill Shelton, Father Ron Clemmer, Deacon Mike Wilton. All those men were ordained of Christ the King in the last 22 years. None of these people, it's likely, would have been ordained. Well, maybe some would have been, but all that came after the visit at Messiah. Of those men, 4 became rectors. 2 of those were church planners. 4 of these men became law enforcement chaplains in the community. 3 of these men are full-time hospital or hospice chaplains in our community. And some have moved outside the state, and we've lost contact with some of them over the years. But you're a part of their lives and their ministries as well. I sent a text to my secretary last night, and I said, do you have any idea how many baptisms we've had at Christ the King? So I got a text this morning. She said, I didn't have time to count, and it's been several years since you asked me that question. But several years ago, we've had over 100 baptisms. All of those have happened since coming to Church of Messiah. If anybody doesn't like the fact that I'm the bishop of the Mid-South Diocese, they should blame you. You know, I know this isn't a normal sermon, but looking back gratefully is what part of this is about. I know that when you look back on your relationship with Messiah, that it's like my relationship with Christ the King, our church. There's some tremendous high points. There's some low points. And we went through, I was sharing with Father Scott last night, that we went through a period of time in 2008 when I met with our men and I said, you know, the good news is there will be a Christ the King. The uncertain news is I can't guarantee that we'll be on this building and this property. But if we're not, God is still in the midst of us. Amen. And we go through those kind of things. It's like your family. You go through ups, you go through downs, you go through struggles. Part of that's because we have an enemy that seeks to kill, steal, and destroy. Part of it is because God has plans that we don't know about.
Amen.
And we have to trust Him. That's where the faith part comes in. See, I'm convinced that when James says to pray the prayer of faith, I'm convinced that prayer of faith, and I've thought about this a long time. To me, the prayer of faith is, God, I trust you. I trust you. And that's where faith does come in. We have to trust him. And that even if we miss it, there's a man, I don't know if you'd be familiar with you or not, his name's Judson Cordwell. He wrote a lot of books, later charismatic, and several years ago he became a friend of ours. And we had him in our church several times. And I was a lot younger than him. He's gone on to be with the Lord now, but one day we were having lunch together. He said, what is the thing that scares you? Most of all, what scares you? And I said, missing God. He said, let me ask you a question. Two questions. Number one, how small do you think you are? How small is God that you can just miss him? I mean, is he that small that you can that easily miss him? And how big are you that God can't set you in the right direction? He said, did you realize on the first trip around the moon that the astronauts had to make 25,000 course corrections? He said, they missed it 25,000 times. But mission control got them back on the course. He said, you're not that big. God's not that small. And that's true. We trust him. And then there's another scripture, Jeremiah 29:11, that I referred to when I was praying for the kids. It's all about God's plan for us. And about how he's created us that we can have a future and a hope. And that's still true for me, for my family, for my church. And as I look back on Jacob's life, see this, I don't know how long that pillar, that rock stayed out in the desert. It may still be there for all we know. But I know this, that every time, if Jacob ever went by there again, he'd remember that rock. God is in this place. But even if he never went back there, the encounter with God that he had in that place stayed with him all the days of his life. See all those names I mentioned? Those priests and deacons? Those, I don't even know how many, more than 100 baptisms. The churches that were started, that were founded, people that have been touched through the years. That all started for us. But it came to fruition, I guess I could say, when on January the 1st, 1995, I had a profound encounter with God at Church of the Messiah in Jacksonville, Florida. And my life has never been the same. And that has been repeated in people's lives more than you know.
That's right.
More than you know. There are other people out there just like John Capetto that you've lost touch with. And yet they're still serving God. They will look back on their life, and if they're honest, they'll know that God was in that place, and he was in my life because of that church. Now, it's good to look back. I probably do it too much. My wife says, you look back too much. My wife just said that was the time limit.
I said that was the time. And I'm alive.
Apparently the Holy Spirit is for it. I want to say to you that you have had a glorious past. That you have a past to be grateful for. That you have 25 years of lives that have been changed, lives that have been enriched, lives that have been transformed. There's more than you can possibly imagine going on in the world because this church existed. I've only shared a little tiny bit of one guy's story and I'm grateful for that rock that was put in the sand 25 years ago. But I'm also grateful for the rock that I was able to put in the sand almost 24 years ago when I visited here. And some of you I met, David Epps was there that day. And where's Lisa? Lisa, you were there that day. You've always been there. You know she has a reputation as the best deacon in the So anyway, I'm here. I guess I'm here to say happy anniversary. You've got a glorious story to tell. There's a glorious story that will continue because I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare, not for calamity, that you may have a future and a hope. Amen. Keep on treating every person who walks through the door as someone that God will use mightily. Invite people to come. Get out, bring them in, because God is in this place. Amen. Let God, you get them here and let God do the rest. Amen. And you'll see that your days your future is still ahead. God knows what He's doing. Trust Him. Happy anniversary. Amen.
Hey, this is Father Scott Loco with Church of Messiah. Thanks for watching our video. If you enjoyed it and you got something out of it, please click the like button below. And also, you can click the subscribe button to get notifications in your inbox when we post other videos in the future. You can click the little bell below and you'll get notifications also. So do that, and we'd appreciate it. So thanks. God bless you. We appreciate it. Pray for us, and we'll be praying for you. God bless you.